All right, we are on the record. The time is 10:06. Today is March 12, 2020. This is the video deposition of Undersheriff Patrick L. Ivey in the matter of Mayra Martinez versus Sheriff Mike Williams et al. Would counsel please identify themselves for the record, and the court reporter will swear in the witness.
John Phillips and Kirby Johnson for the plaintiff.
Steve Powell and Gabby Young for the City of Jacksonville.
Sean Granite for Vickery, Chastain, and Andres.
Paul Darajati for Borisade.
Before we start, there's an ongoing stipulation that any party's objection to any question preserves that for all parties, just so we don't have, crosstalk and concern for that. That's fine.
Very well.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Please state your full name for the record.
Patrick Livingston Ivey.
You go by Undersheriff Ivey?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Undersheriff, what is your background in education?
I hold a bachelor's degree, and background. You mean just education?
Yes, probably bad question. Let's start with education.
Bachelor's degree.
Okay. From where and what?
Liberty University, 2002.
Okay. And give us a little bit of understanding about your career development.
Came on with went to the police academy in 1992. Came on the police department in 1994. Was dual certified in corrections and police. Held a certificate in both in the state of Florida. Was patrolman from 1994 to 1999. Was a sergeant from 1999 through middle of 2003. Then got promoted again to lieutenant in July 1st of 2003. Assistant chief 2009. Full chief 2014. Undersheriff 2015 until current. And while in those various ranks, patrolman, basic patrol, street work, worked on a task force. As a sergeant, was a task force sergeant also, was also a field training officer and sergeant. As a lieutenant, I was a watch commander. I was also the commanding officer of the robbery unit, traffic homicide, auto theft, missing persons, homicide. Then as assistant chief, I ran narcotics and vice, ICAC, which is Internet Crimes Against Children, forfeiture warehouse, and computer forensics for 4 years. And was also then a zone commander out in Zone 4. And then as a full chief, I was chief of Patrol West, which means I had half of the city of the uniform personnel. And then as the undersheriff, I oversee the day-to-day operations of the entire agency, which is all 5 departments.
Okay. First of all, congratulations on your progression and thank you for your service. Going to, you kind of anticipated my next question. What does the undersheriff do?
Kind of run the day-to-day operations. So obviously the sheriff is elected. So I am the highest non-elected individual in the agency. There's one sheriff, one undersheriff, and we have 5 department directors. So those directors that run the through chiefs, assistant chiefs, and the rank and file, that culminates at me for I would say major decisions and weighing in on things that are impacting the overall department.
Okay. What's the difference between, from a standpoint of duties? Obviously, I know one's elected and one's not. But what's the relation, the professional relationship, I guess, or reporting relationship between you and the sheriff?
So he is the boss. He is the sheriff. So normally I make decisions, but some, it depends. I don't say it depends on what it is, but anything that's impactful to the entire agency, I actually, we have conversations about that. And we're pretty much in sync, looking for the betterment of how we can provide better service to the community.
Okay. Have you ever had your deposition taken before?
Several times.
Okay, I would assume. Just, some rules of the road, as you're probably well aware. This isn't a test of endurance or memory. So if you have a problem with either one, let me know.
I will.
It's we generally try to rest the court reporter's fingers, if nothing else, every hour or so.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure how long we're going to go. It's not going to be an all-day affair, but it's going to be a hours affair.
Okay.
If you don't understand my question, please make sure to let me know, because if you answer my question, I'm going to assume you understood it. Is that
Absolutely. Yep.
fair? And if the last rule is we generally, because everything we say is being written down,
Yes.
on the street and general conversation, like we're talking about coronavirus, we kind of shorthand and
Absolutely.
and anticipate what everybody's saying. In this, we kind of need to do long format with yes and no's rather than ahas and ahas.
And no shaking of the head. Right.
We have video so we can back it up, but generally it's not preferred. So we received what's. Yeah, give me that first. The first one. Basically, 2 reports with your name on it. 1, 2.
Declarations and something else.
Stapled weird.
Disclosures, what I'm at.
And obviously, I understand you didn't type this out. That would be silly. But this is our understanding of your opinions, and I just want to kind of run through it, if that's okay. Sentence 1, Undersheriff Ivy will opine that the policies and practices of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office met or exceeded recognized federal and state law enforcement standards and are consistent with contemporary police practices and standards. You prepared to do that today?
Yes.
Sentence 2, specifically, the JSO's non-deadly force policy met or exceeded recognized federal and state law enforcement standards and is consistent with contemporary police practices. Are you prepared to testify about that today?
Yes.
Sentence 3, Undersheriff Ivy will testify regarding the JSO's application of its use of force policy and determination of use of force violations requiring discipline that includes termination, as in Officer Borisade's case. Are you prepared to testify about that today?
Yes.
4, Undersheriff will base his opinions on his experience and training as a supervisor of the JSO. That does not appear to be opinion. It's just what we expect to happen today. That appears true, though?
Yes.
Okay. And last sentence 5, Undersheriff Ivy relies on the facts contained in JSO's investigative reports along with the interviews of officers and witnesses, the scores video, and the PTDF. Again, doesn't appear to be an opinion, but is that a true statement?
Yes.
Okay, let's start there. Relies on the facts contained in the investigative reports along with the interviews of officers and witnesses and the videos. Did you bring anything with you today?
No, I did not.
Okay. What have you, from recollection, what have you reviewed in relation to this matter?
Can you give me a time frame? You mean to prepare for today?
Good, fair example of clarification. Let's start there. What have you done in preparation for today?
I read the summary of the summation,
Okay.
which came from Internal Affairs,
Okay.
and I watched a couple video clips, one of which was in the parking lot of the Gentlemen's Club on University Boulevard. I also watched 2 clips from the jail, one inside the Sally Port, outside the door, the intake door, and then the one inside the intake room where the interaction between the female corrections officer and Ms. Martinez.
Okay.
I also read I believe that it's the statement, I thought it was a declarations page provided by Mr. Powell.
Okay.
And at this moment, that's all I can think of that I've reviewed.
Have you conducted any personal interviews at any point related to this case, either the investigation of Borisade or the investigation of the criminal matter involving Mayra Martinez?
In me, any interviews? No, I don't conduct
Okay.
interviews. No.
Okay. Other than, and I believe you gave a press conference right after this happened. Do you recall that?
I do not recall doing it, but I know as an order of practice, I do them when we're making an
Okay.
arrest.
Are you aware of any other active involvement with the case? Any other physical involvement with the case? Any aspect of what Mayra Martinez or Borisade's interactions that you did on this matter?
I may classify physical different than you do. Can you clarify that?
Okay, fair. What do you recall doing anything else as a part of your role and function with JSO in this matter, where you were personally involved with this, any of these cases?
Objection affirmed.
I think I understand.
Fair.
Integrity reports to me.
Okay.
Integrity informs me of what they have. They do the investigation. I do not do it. They conduct the interviews, as you've mentioned. They advise when they have probable cause to make an arrest of an employee, and I tell them that they're informing me. I'm not approving it.
Right.
But I say proceed, because it's just basically a notification. I then, prior to doing a news conference, back then, that's why I asked you to clarify on time
Fair.
frame, I would have read arrest docket, and I would have done the press conference. So that would have entailed a small meeting with integrity in reference to those facts. And that would have been the physical aspect of what I did.
You would expect in whether we're kind of assembling it after the fact or going off of protocol. Detective Cayenne was the lead detective from Integrity on this case. Is that fair? Do you recall?
I do not recall.
Okay, but whoever the detective is with Integrity would have reported to you along the way.
Through their chain of command. So the unit is under my, we do public corruption also, arresting of employees, but it would have been the lieutenant of that unit
Okay.
that would have had most of the one-on-one interaction with me, or would have been the speaking head of that unit. And then there was also a sergeant, and then there would have been the detective.
Okay.
But I do not recall if it was.
Do you recall who the lieutenant was for Integrity back when this happened?
I don't actually, because we actually have gone through about 5 over the last few years.
Fair enough.
Several, we've gone through several.
Some kind of weird questions that I expect I know the answer to, but I got to ask them anyway. Are you being compensated in any way extra other than what your salary is for testifying in this case?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Have you written any reports pertaining to this case or your opinions in this case?
Have I written?
Yes.
No, I have not.
Okay. Have you had any reports written on your behalf regarding your opinions in this case?
Opinions?
Yes.
No.
Do you know if you've testified before this, as a non-retained expert on behalf of any police force?
Rephrase that.
Yeah. Do you know that you're a non-retained expert today?
I believe I am, yes.
Okay, fair. Do you know if you've had that role before in cases?
I think due to the position, if I'm in that role all the time, but if you're saying very structured in a deposition, no. But I think being the agency head and the signer off of policy with the sheriff, that by proxy I would be.
Right.
Yes.
That makes sense. Do you recall ever testifying in a civil rights case before?
No.
Okay. Again, probably a silly question, but I gotta ask it. Have you prepared any exhibits that you expect to use at trial testimony?
No.
Have you written publications regarding uses of force for any third-party entity, anybody outside of JSO?
No.
Opinion 1, sentence 1. Let's go back to it, and I'll mark that as both of those as composite exhibit, plaintiff's composite exhibit 1 to this deposition, because and I'll identify it that it's the most recent disclosure of expert witnesses dated. Oh, I didn't realize that Paul's on this one. Okay. Dated March 10th, 2020. And I think the first one dated June 14th, 2019 for identification purposes. Are you aware if you're testifying on behalf of former Officer Borisade at trial?
I have not been notified
Okay.
of such.
Do you know whether you're testifying on his behalf as his non-retained expert today?
For Officer Borisade,
Yes.
I don't know. I haven't discussed who if I'm for Officer Borisade specifically.
Fair enough. You're here to give opinions.
And
As
yes,
disclosed.
As disclosed in
Okay,
my
fair enough.
experience and yes, training.
And lawyers generally won't tell you when they're trying to be tricky, but 99% of the time, if I'm not trying to, like, that question's not trying to be tricky, but it may be that I asked a bad question, and so just let me know, or Mr. Powell, let me know. Opinions. Going back, sentence 1, Undersheriff Ivey will opine that the policies and practices of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office met or exceeded recognized federal and state law enforcement standards and are consistent with contemporary police practices and standards. That seems pretty straightforward to me.
John, if I could
Yeah.
interpose an observation, if you're going to be using these two disclosures in combination, the first one qualified that sentence to the extent that the policies and practices of JSO may have applied to the incident at issue in this action.
I think we get that.
I just want to be clear.
as the-
I
yeah,
assume
but-
that you understand that the undersheriff is here to offer his opinions relative to the policies and practices and other aspects of the agency with respect to this incident as the agency's procedures and standards and so forth apply to this case.
I get it. I get that. We're not talking about overall, and I think we have to deal with. I think the supplement replaces the original. You're not binding me to all of them, I assume. But I also understand, just if that phrase was left out, I'm certain one is not a general. I don't care if it's a general opinion. It has to apply to this case to be important. So,
That's fine.
Okay.
I just don't want there to be any unintended tricks or
waiver,
consequences.
yeah, no, I'm not saying one waives anything related to this case, because it doesn't say as it applies to this case, if that's what you're trying to clarify.
I just don't want you asking his opinion about traffic enforcement.
Oh, certainly.
All right.
No, we're talking about use of force.
Sure.
Okay,
Well, use of force, arrest policy.
correct,
Things of that nature.
correct. Germane to this case. Where I was sentence one. What does that mean to you?
To me, in my position, we are a triple accredited agency. And that accreditation is the standards and best practices, not only in the state of Florida, because some of the accrediting bodies are Florida-based, and some are national-based. It means that through putting our money where our mouth is, so to speak, speaking in plain English, trying to, we go through a rigorous process to have nationally recognized best practices that meet those consistent with contemporary policies, police practices and standards. So, and they exceed most federal and law enforcement. And we usually perform very, very well in those reaccreditations, which are required to maintain that status.
Okay, help me understand that. I think I got the guy that can help me understand that. And I've seen it on the JSO policy manual at the bottom of nearly every page. AAA
Yes.
accredited agency. What does that mean?
So there are accrediting bodies, as I mentioned, that they come in and they do a bottom-up and also top-down approach, consistent with when you go through a accreditation or reaccreditation of interviews, on-site assessments, policy reviews, and then standards interpreted nationally or state to where that has to be found in your policy or in practices at your agency, verified through consistent, through history, proofs, they call them proofs, to verify that you meet all of those marks.
How do they do it? What's the? I mean, I don't really care from their end, but what's the practical impact that you see? What do you see the accredited agencies do, or how do you cooperate with them when they're? Forget all that. Do they come on site?
I said on site.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell me what they do when they're on site.
Objection to form.
Interviews and inspections. Example, in the jail, cleanliness, food preparation areas, housing not overcrowded, proper prescription medications in supply to be dispersed to inmates that need them, things of that nature.
How often do they do it?
Depending upon the accredited bodies, but most of them are every 3 years.
Okay.
But it's a build-up. It isn't like they all of a sudden show up, meaning you know in advance that you had to have demonstrated proofs all along to ensure that you were being compliant that entire time.
They check the books.
Absolutely, they check the
Okay.
books too, yes.
Do they interview every officer?
You said every.
Yeah.
No.
Probably practically impossible.
Well,
But-
with 1,783 sworn and approved positions,
Yeah.
almost 800 corrections, no, they don't.
Okay.
But they do an array of various ranks and across whatever department they are doing.
Do they review RTR reports? Do they get involved at that level?
I believe they review, I can tell you this, I don't know every report that they do, but staff, they'll go so deep as to say even staff meeting minute notes of a required meeting to meet a standard.
Okay. Will you agree with me that the policies and practices of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office are only as good as the people that enforce them?
Objection to form.
I don't think I quite understand.
Okay. What are policies and practices?
Policies and practices, the policies are how we tell officers to conduct themselves or complete tasks, handle calls, things of that nature, going very specific.
And how are policies conveyed to officers?
They have a what we call Power DMS, if you want to go very specific.
Yeah, let's go.
Power DMS is actually the program that has all the policies, memorandums, information bulletins, legal bulletins, and the policies, which are numbered in a specific numbering system. As policies change, there's updates. Everybody gets an email notification, and everybody is required to go in and acknowledge their receipt of that new information. So that's how they are conveyed. But in addition to that, normally when you have things that are impactful, and I'm going very specific to officers, something that would change how officers would do something like handling police pursuit, that would be handled at that level, but also there would be watch commanders that would go over this new policy with their subordinates at roll call when they have roll calls each day.
Okay.
So there's a variety of ways and multiple times that they're exposed to.
What is Power DMS?
It's a computer program that actually houses our training and dissemination of bulletins that I'd mentioned.
Okay, let's just kind of take and again, if you don't know, you don't know.
Right.
But if you don't know, help me understand who might know, and I'll ask along the way. But just kind of gearing you up for that. Let's take Officer Borisade for as an example. So he would have gone through a local police academy that's is it a division of JSO? How does that work?
So that's the Northeast Florida Criminal Justice Training Center here. There's also one in St. Johns County. And there's different ones across the state and then different states. What happens normally is when you go through, depending on which state you go in, you actually, they train a curriculum that gets you to a certification level for that state. Because some states don't accept the certification and training for others. And if you decided to go to another state, you'd have to do a equivalency of training course because some statutes are different and things of that nature. It gets you to a basic level of law enforcement training. Officer Borisade, I don't have any information, or I have no idea of where he went to his police academy and got that. Okay. But he would have had to, at bare minimum, demonstrated to FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, that he met the Florida standard for training, not us. So then what happens is you have a certificate, but it's not activated. You can say all day long that I'm a law enforcement officer. No, you merely have a certificate that's not activated. It is not activated until you are attached to an actual agency. So here at JSO, if you go to the police academy, what we then do is, after we've done all that verification and reference to through wherever you went to the academy, then you do a orientation class, and in the orientation class is when you get JSO, more JSO specific training. Again, knowing that I could walk out this door and go to 30 different calls in a 12-hour shift, and 5 of them could be robberies with 5 different circumstances, you try to encompass the training that will help them complete most of the tasks. But in addition to that, they're always under the supervision of a sergeant and then a lieutenant, and you can usually, hopefully, if you're astute and you do the right thing, call a supervisor to ask questions when it may be slightly different than what's in policy.
Okay. And assume with me, if you will, that well, before I get there, so it's my understanding that Officer Borisade was paid by JSO to go to the local police academy. Is that how it's done? Who employs people at the police academy if they're getting paid?
So I don't know.
Okay.
I would have to take your word for it. So it depends, meaning, and I'm trying to, when I say it depends who pays for it, there's different buckets of how individuals get to become police officers. I'm a police officer that comes from Georgia. I don't have a JSO law enforcement. I have to go somewhere and get an equivalency of training. We're just recently going to start even offering that. They would normally have to go to St. Johns County to get that. They've been offering it for several years. Yeah, I would go there and it would translate, then I would become a Florida law enforcement certificate holder. Then that would make them eligible to apply for a job here, and because they already hold a certificate, they're what's called a certified applicant, meaning they don't have to go through an academy. Opposite, another guy just graduates college, doesn't have any law enforcement experience, or has never been to a police academy. We offer what's called non-certified applicant. What that individual does is he goes through a much longer process because he goes through the FSCJ partnership with JSO to use their academy, because they actually own that building, and gets a certification when they meet the basic requirements of the FDLE standard for a certificate here in Florida. So who pays for it? It varies. And listening to you, without knowing Borisade's, I would not be able to tell you who paid for that.
Let me do this. Let me refresh your recollection. We can play the press conference if need be. But you said in the press conference that Officer Borisade was, so this incident happened, what, April 27th, 2016? And you said in the press conference, Officer Borisade was hired March 2, 2015, and is a probationary police officer. I guess let me start by, what is a probationary police officer?
So based on, there's a probationary period. So you were talking two buckets of things.
Okay.
If you're a recruit, when you're a recruit, you don't have police powers yet.
Right.
Until you become a police officer and you have a graduation and the sheriff swears you in at the end of your graduation. Only at that point are you allowed then to enter into a field training program where you ride with multiple officers, so usually over about a 3 or 4 month period. Then after that, you become a solo beat officer and you ride solo. So what you just read about from the press conference still does not tell me what did he do way prior to that.
Okay.
It doesn't. But so I think I'm trying to tell you that didn't help because it's two different time periods.
But does JSO pay recruits to attend police academy?
On occasion we do. It's called a paid class, and they can be non-certified.
Okay.
But even in that realm, it's a lot to understand. There's two different chutes. I could go to a BLE and pay for it myself, because let's put it this way. I don't live with mommy and daddy or whoever. I don't have anybody to take care of me, and I have to go to the academy at night, and I have to work during the day. I have to pay my own way going through the academy. I did that back in 1992. I worked full time and I went to the academy for 9.5 months. I paid for it. Other individuals along the way, JSO was running another class. Guess what? They got paid, but they went usually Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 during the day. They got paid to be there. So again, I wouldn't know.
Okay. What did you mean, and again, we could play it if we need to, it's at the beginning of the video, but what did you mean by probationary police officer? What is a probationary police officer?
So when they get hired, and at the date they go to the street, they have a probationary period. Probationary means that they don't have, this is only one piece of it though, they don't have civil service protections. So outside of your probationary period, if Officer Borisade could have fought for his job, if he wanted to, and then that goes in a whole other gamut down another rabbit hole to say he could have chosen disciplinary hearing board, civil service board, arbitration to try to argue why he should keep his job. But because the reason I said that is, if you pay attention to the press conferences I ever do, because I'm always asked that by the media, I say he was arrested and fired because he was on probation, because the probation allows me to immediately fire him. Other words, I could say he was arrested and he's put on administrative leave, because then he has all those options at his disposal, not that we created through civil service protections and whatnot.
Is that through collective bargaining with a union?
Some is and some isn't. Some is that we have some through collective bargaining, but civil service rules are separate from collective bargaining.
Are there different standards? So we talked about policies and we talked about policies of JSO. Are there different standards for officers who are probationary versus who have civil service protection?
Standards, no. I mean, in how they need to do their job. What it just means is I would have fired him anyway, or attempted to fire him anyway. Arrest would have been the same. I would have just had to go through a longer process if he chose to fight for his job.
But you're familiar with Tim James, right?
Yeah.
Why wasn't he fired?
We did move to fire Tim James
He ultimately resigned. Are you aware of that?
because he was pending termination. But because he was, you're getting it. I think you're getting the picture now.
Right.
He was outside of probation, so he had, what's the word I'm looking for? He had options at his disposal to prolong his employment with the agency till he resigned. But he wasn't riding out on the street. He was sitting in teleserve. So it would have been, had Borisade chose to do the same Tim James and been off probation, it would have been that longer process. So Tim James was, we wanted to fire him, but, you know.
Can JSO fire an officer that has civil service privileges?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Tim James knew. He knew that once he went to the hearing, it was probably not going to look too good.
Right.
So we do this all the time. I've actually got one on March 26th, Civil Service Board hearing, for an individual that I've said needs to be terminated. And he's what they call they're exercising their rights to employment.
Who was that?
What do you mean? You want to know who the hearing's for?
Yeah.
It's not for battery, it's for departure from the truth,
Okay.
along with some other charges.
Who is it?
Officer Sines.
SIGNS?
SINES.
Okay. My understanding is Tim James was arrested for battery June 10th, 2017, and resigned July 26th, 2018, so a year and a month.
Because you
Okay.
toll the administrative case, it gets put on hold because you can't use, because of Garrity laws and things of that nature, you can't use the testimony on the administrative before the criminal is exhausted. In other words, you run the risk of losing the ability to discipline them in the administrative process. So what happens is, because that case sat over the state attorney's office and it's going through its criminal process, you had to wait till that was done before you can say, okay, green light. Then in the administrative process, because of Florida State Statute 112, Police Officers' Bill of Rights, you have 6 months, 180 days is the threshold that's recognized to do the administrative. So as it got to the end of that and it was coming down termination, he decided to resign. He ran out as much time as he could, is what he did.
Okay. But I guess, how would this is just trying to get a clarification. Tim James was ultimately arrested for punching a handcuffed 17-year-old in the back of a police car. Is that your recollection?
Objection to form.
Do you know what Tim James was ultimately arrested for?
I believe the charge was battery.
Okay. Do you recall whether the person battered was handcuffed or not?
They had taken the individual. There was more to it. I don't remember all the details, so I don't want to say that I remember this perfectly, but there was something about taken out of the back seat of the police car and all that. So at the time he was punched, I don't remember if he was handcuffed or not.
Okay. Do you know if, strike that. Okay, we talked about policies. What are practices?
The practices or other agencies are showing, if so we don't bifurcate the sentence out.
Yeah.
The police practices, standards, it says practices, but it's interchanged with standards. It's acceptable handcuffing techniques, not only for the safety of the officer, but safety of the individual that's need to be handcuffed. Double locking of the handcuffs, prone handcuffing, never in front. It's those practices that have shown to be the best way to do things.
Okay, and so I'm boiling, and I want to boil it down fairly, but I'm boiling sentence 1 as JSO does what it needs to do related to federal and state standards and consistent with how other police forces do it and are supposed to do it. Is that fair?
Well,
Objection to form.
I'm just going to add
Yeah,
exceeded.
exceeded.
We exceed.
Okay, fair
exceed.
enough. Who is the accreditation agency for the AAA? Is that AAA?
No,
Okay,
there's multiple.
it's the AAA is the ranking.
Tr-
Sorry, I'm shooting 2 questions at you at once.
Yeah. There's multiple accrediting bodies.
Okay.
Director Tom Hackney, CALEA is one. I can't remember the name. They're acronyms. CALEA is an acronym too.
Okay.
So I can't remember all the acronyms.
Fair enough.
But Director Tom Hackney is the Director of Professional Standards, which oversees. We actually have a very robust accreditation section within our agency that makes sure that our policies and these practices and standards agency-wide are not only adhered to, that we are ready for every reaccreditation and everything of that nature. That probably would be a good question for him.
Okay, fair enough.
If I may, for the record, to assist, CALEA stands for the Commission on the Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies, which I think you know.
Yes. So AAA is the top.
Objection to form.
Do you know what does AAA accredited agency mean?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have an idea, but multiple agencies are accrediting us. So
Okay. Do you know where? I mean, how JSO ranks? Do they, did they get the top rating, or is it, do you know what? I'm just trying to put AAA accredited agency in context of what that means compared to a rating system.
Objection to form. No question. That's not a question.
Do you know what AAA accredited agency means?
you already asked me that.
No,
Basically, you did.
I'm adding more.
And okay, go ahead.
Do you know what that means in comparison to other law enforcement agencies?
I don't know if they do it in a comparative.
Okay.
When they give that, you would probably need to call them and ask them.
Okay, fair enough. Sentence 2, specifically the JSO's non-deadly force policy met or exceeded recognized federal and state law enforcement standards and is consistent with contemporary police practices. Do you know, as we sit here today, whether Borisade contends he was taught to do what he did at all times in his encounters with Ms. Martinez?
You're asking me, do I know?
Yes.
No.
Okay. If former Officer Borisade says that he was abiding by the rules and regulations and how he was taught to act as an officer in all encounters with Ms. Martinez, would you dispute that?
Yes.
Why?
Through my training, myself, I'm going all the way back to the academy, all the years when I went through use of force in-service training, to include as I've been on the staff and actually observed, going out to the academy on a few occasions and observed the training that they receive. Knowing from my experience of handling probably thousands and thousands of calls over my career, not only handling them myself, but responding to them as a sergeant and lieutenant and officers have handled. I still, on occasion, go out and ride with police officers. I did it as recent as 3 weeks ago. I rode a night shift. And couple that with watching the video, it's very easy to come to that conclusion, and why I would dispute that.
Okay. Did you have misunderstandings of JSO's policies and procedures when you were a rookie?
No,
None.
no.
Okay. You have a photographic memory?
Objection to form.
In your career, have you ever misunderstood or misapplied any of JSO's policies and procedures?
That's not what you first. You're asking me
No, I'm
a
asking you a
different
question.
question.
Yes, sir.
Have I that? Well, I could go many different ways. I don't know if you're saying have I ever made a mistake in regards to policy? Absolutely.
Okay. As a rookie, did you ever make a mistake regarding policy?
I'm sure I did.
Okay. Rookies is it fair to say that rookies are more prone to make mistakes than a veteran officer?
Objection to form.
Not necessarily.
Okay. Do you know why you're retained by former Officer Borisade when you have opinions that basically say that he's wrong or not telling the truth?
Objection to form. He's a non-retained expert.
Okay.
Fact.
Do you know why you're a non-retained expert for former Officer Borisade when you specifically are finding that he didn't meet or exceed the practices and the policies and practices of JSO?
Objection to form.
I can't speculate. You're asking me, do I know why? I don't.
Okay. Opinion or sentence 3, Undersheriff Ivy will testify regarding the JSO's application of its use of force policy and determination of use of force violations requiring discipline that includes termination, as in Officer Borisade's case. What are your opinions related to that?
Objection to form. Which part of it?
Sorry, what's your understanding of sentence 3?
One key word in there is termination. Okay. So, I'm the undersheriff. So in our discipline policy, regardless, you could plug in anything there. In its application of use of force, its application of pursuit policy, and then go on with the rest of the sentence and say, if it's a violation, found to be a violation after an investigation is complete, if it's a criminal, then administrative. Regardless, again, plug in whichever policy you want to put in there, and through the investigation finds that in the review process that it requires significant discipline, termination, suspension, demotion, loss of pay, termination, it culminates at my desk. So my understanding of that is that the application of use of force, but when it is a violation and it required termination, I am required by policy to be the final reviewer of a case of that nature, and I render discipline.
You've reviewed the videos, and I don't know if going second by second through 6 minutes of video and asking you, was this a violation of the use of force policy? Was this a violation of use of force policy, or whatever is a good use of anybody's time? But do you have specific opinions as to what uses of force Borisade used on Mayra Martinez that constituted violations?
So first, he violated the law. So before we even got to worry about getting to policy violations, he was arrested for breaking the law. So that makes the policy violation questions a lot easier, because the threshold was already met that he violated state statute and he battered her. So then going over the policy violations, it's, we're getting hung up on that piece. This other piece, there's battery in the police world. Then there's also excessive force, interchangeably sometimes with unnecessary force. Just because someone maybe used excessive force doesn't necessarily mean it constitutes a battery.
Right.
But you do it in reverse. If they committed a battery in their role as a law enforcement officer, in their official capacity, I mean, a pretty strong argument could be saying that if they battered them, it may have been excessive or / unnecessary force. You get it? One doesn't necessarily translate going one way, but one more predominantly does the other way. So getting to the policy violations is a after next step, easily to see because he already violated state statute. And in our discipline policy, we have conduct to support criminal acts / whatever you did against the law.
Okay.
Conduct to support criminal acts / DUI, even if you were off duty. We already know administratively, you're driving your personal car, you got DUI. Our policy says that you shall know and abide by the laws of the state, federal, whatever, municipal ordinances. If you already violated that and you've met probable cause by not only us or another agency, we know that administratively we already have the charge of conduct to support blank. So in this case, you can see that's a long explanation to say he gets arrested for battery. We already know we have conduct to support criminal acts, battery.
Once you get battery, you got the JSO policy violation. That makes sense.
It's there.
Okay.
Right.
And the battery.
And at a lower level of proving, you don't have to have probable cause. Remember, administratively, it's preponderance of evidence.
Right. Right. It's a good point. And from the video of the Sally Port, why do they call it Sally Port?
That's just what they call it.
Okay. From the video of the
There's
pre-trial,
probably some significance, but I have
I'm
no
sure. From the video of the Sally Port, there appears to be, some level of application of force that looks like punches against the wall. Do you recall those?
You mean him hitting her?
Yes.
I do recall.
Okay.
Yes.
2, 3, whatever it is, punches
Yeah.
after she kicks him. Are all of those batteries, and that subset of violations of the use of force, in your opinion?
You said subsets.
Yeah. Well,
Are you thinking? Do I think all 3 of those strikes are a battery?
yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I've been kicked. I've been bitten. I was attacked with a knife in my career. Listen, she's handcuffed. No reason to strike her at all. They teach techniques in the academy for him to use other appropriate measures to respond to being kicked at or kicked.
What are those?
There's several. He could do she's already handcuffed, so he could have spun her, used an arm technique. He could have. I don't want to get into technical names, but I think Officer Rose, he would be the individual to answer all those questions. But there are several. They used the hobble on her, is my understanding. They could have told another officer, "Hey, get me a hobble." Could have sat her on the bench and cinched her legs. Again, sitting on the bench, no harm to her. Keeps her where her feet are together. So there's several things that they could have done.
I assume you've been kicked in the testicles.
Yes.
Okay. And experienced that kind of
Yes.
pain, and is it fair to say that it certainly disables you? It depends on how hard you've been kicked, but
Correct.
it can create some disability.
Objection to form.
I can't speculate that if Officer Borisade, what he felt.
Yeah, and I haven't asked you to.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, it
I have never been incapacitated by that.
Okay.
But again, I've been pepper sprayed by other officers too while they were fighting with a subject, I got sprayed more, and I fought through that too.
Okay.
So the reality is that maybe it's based on the individual. I don't know.
Okay. Do you know what former Officer Borisade was experiencing from that kick?
Objection to form.
No.
Okay. Officer Borisade sat in the room over and said that he was specifically taught that the use of force and the way he used it was okay, both in class and in FTO. Do you know what he was taught specifically in class and FTO?
Objection to form.
I wasn't in class with him.
Okay.
And my question is, are you asking what he was taught in relation to this specific incident? In other words, was he taught to do X or taught to do Y, or was he just taught in general? And I'm really not sure where you're going with that, which is why I objected to
Do
the
you
form
know
of the
what?
question.
What? And I think I asked it right. But do you know what Officer Borisade was taught at the academy regarding use of force related to a handcuffed individual?
My question wouldn't be yes or no. My question would be, there would have to be, you could go back and find the actual curriculum that they utilized. I
Okay.
mean, and you would have other individuals that would probably be exhibiting, out of 1,783 policemen, it would probably be happening, if it was a accepted taught technique, I'm sure you would have it, I mean, you'd be seeing it all the time because they would be saying it's okay.
Right, but my direct concern here is Tim James was going in and out of that academy at the time Borisade was there. You're aware of that, aren't you?
No.
He was visiting Camacho and was told he couldn't go to the academy anymore.
Objection to form.
So yes, and that was a case that we disciplined on home, but I look at things from an investigative standpoint, kind of connection. So he was training people out of the academy?
I don't know what he was doing, but you're aware that
That's like saying every policeman we have has to go out to the academy. So by you saying, that could be like Borisade was at 501 and he said, hey, and Tim James was in 501 too.
right, and I'm trying. I'm getting there. Do you know why Tim James was forbidden from going to the academy?
Objection to form.
Yes,
Why?
he was dating another employee.
Okay. Are you aware that Tim James was at the Sallyport at the same time Borisade was at the Sallyport?
I have no clue if he was or wasn't.
Do you know what interactions Borisade had with Tim James at any point during his young career?
Do I have any idea if they had any interactions?
Yeah.
No, but I would hope that the good interactions he had with, like Officer Rose, his actual training people, would have been good. I mean, I can't speculate if they ever even talked. Are you saying that they talked?
Do you know what Tim James posted to his Facebook page?
Yes. Talking about the cooking the chicken, that kind
We'll
of
get
picture.
into that. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Okay. Application use of force and termination. What role did you have in Tim James's discipline?
Same as I described with Officer Borisade, except with the exception is Officer James was not on probation, so therefore he had the ability to grieve and go through other process, civil service or contractually He had a couple different cases, not all of which one was a battery. One was something posting something on social media. I don't recall all of it, but yeah, he had a couple different cases over a few year period.
Was former Officer Borisade charged with battery related to any of the events at Scores?
I'm not making fun of you, but you keep mispronouncing his name and it's driving me nuts. Borisade, not Borisade.
Are you aware that I've met with him last
Is it
Monday?
Shadi? Then that means we're saying it wrong.
Yes.
Then you need to correct me because that's driving me nuts. I'm thinking, are we talking about the same person here?
Hey, Paul, how do you pronounce your client's name?
Wake up.
Paul?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, it was like Sade, is the way Paul explained it.
Hey,
Sade, yeah.
okay, so neither one of us are saying it right.
Yeah, Borisade is how he...
Then somebody help us out with that because that was driving me nuts.
Bear with me. Sallyport, Scores. Are you aware if Officer Borisade was charged with battery as a result of anything that happened at Scores?
I don't think we bifurcated it out like that. Back then, when they brought it to me, they said he committed battery. So I don't recall if they did it like that.
An arresting and booking report does not have to allege the specific battery?
I didn't
Objection
say
to
that.
form.
Okay.
That's not what I said.
Okay.
I said I don't remember if it listed 2 counts of battery. I don't recall if it listed 2 counts of battery, 1 count of battery. I don't remember.
Okay. As we sit here today, what are your opinions regarding Officer Borisade's violations of JSO procedure at the Scores parking lot?
From memory, I did look at the video a couple weeks ago. I do recall her hitting her head. Violation of policy all day long. Totally unacceptable. Where he got that from, I have no clue. That makes me think when you're saying he talked to Tim James. Did Tim James ever even do anything like that to say that Tim James caused this other behavior? No way, because I don't even think Tim James even exhibited that.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
I tell you what, it's been an hour and 10 minutes. Let's take a break and I'll
Gotcha.
I'll have that ready.
We're off the record at 11:09. We are back on the record at 11:18.
Plaintiffs 2 are some materials that have been produced to us pursuant to a public records request. Do you know if you've ever seen this document before?
I've never seen this document before.
Okay. Are you aware, well, let me ask a better question than that.
For the record, do you want to explain what this
Yeah,
document is
I'll
that
get
we're
there.
looking at?
I'll get there. March 20, 2016. Do you recall that you actually told Tim James in a letter that he could not use his police powers or wear his uniform as a result of some social media posts?
I remember an investigation, but as a normal order of practice on something that would be, I guess, of a serious nature, it's called defrock. I take away their police powers, and they are notified where a letter that's prepared by Internal Affairs, which I sign, but it's a standard form letter.
Okay. It's in the middle of that packet, but let me just go to it. It looks like this.
Yeah, I know what they look like, yeah.
There it is. There's a letter in the packet dated March 20, 2016. What is that?
It's it's called a notice of transfer letter.
What's the significance?
It's being transferred to teleserve.
Okay. What is teleserve?
Teleserve is where individuals, through a couple different reasons, if you are injured to the degree that you can't do your normal duties as a police officer out on the street, or if you're an individual where your police powers are being taken away while you're either being investigated or maybe potentially pending a termination case. So there's several different reasons that you could be sent to teleserve.
And what does teleserve mean? Like what actually are they doing?
So telephone,
Yeah.
serve, they can still write police reports that don't require the response of a policeman. So I call and I say, my bicycle was stolen. They can do that report over the phone. And they give them their CCR number, the report number, whatnot. That's how they do it. We do it because it's more efficient, and you have individuals that can do that duty that they don't need to be in uniform and respond.
First line of the letter, in the best interest of the city of Jacksonville and Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, Undersheriff Ivy has decided to transfer you from your current assignment. Undersheriff Ivy, that's you.
Yep, I think.
Does that seem like something you would have done in this instance? Are you responsible for that transfer? How are you involved?
No, as one of the agency heads,
Yeah.
I'm in the best interest of the city, saying
Okay.
it's a standard letter.
Okay.
Anybody, because I want to say the language in one of these changed just ever so slightly recently. Anybody that would have gotten this notice of transfer, there'll be probably dozens of them, for a variety of maybe departure from the truth, maybe whatever, depending on what it is. There would be many of these letters would just address to different officers because of this is a standard letter. This isn't a Tim James. It's Tim James exclusive because it has his name on it. but
Right.
It could very easily say somebody else's name.
Do you know when he was put back on duty?
I have no clue.
Would there have been and I didn't see one, but would there have been a form that reversed this, for instance, it's in the best interest of the city of Jacksonville, that you've transferred from teleserve back to
So the transfer going back actually goes through the system. Usually that's a verbal. There may be a letter, but they don't need my signature for that. They do the signature when we're taking the powers away.
Okay. As we sit here today, do you know how long Officer James was assigned to teleserve from this incident?
For this, I have no clue.
Okay.
No.
Let's keep going in the packet till we see what look like Facebook posts. Do you know if you reviewed social media posts of Tim James related to this reassignment?
Say that again.
Do you know if you actually reviewed the posts?
I remember how I said, I remember one picture of a grill, some chicken or steaks on a grill, and I want to say an AR in his hand.
Okay.
That's all I remember.
And do you know who Tim James' Facebook friends were at this time?
I don't do social media.
Yeah. You aware that Steve Zona does social media?
FOP president?
Yeah.
I have no clue.
You aware?
I know they do. I think through FOP. But I mean, are you talking about FOP or personal?
Do you know if Steve Zona has a Facebook page?
personal
Yes.
Facebook page? No, I have no clue.
Do you know Mike Williams has one?
I have no clue.
Okay.
I know he has a personal one.
Correct.
I have no clue.
Okay.
I don't do it.
And what I want to understand is if some of these posts align with JSO protocol and
Did we, if you don't mind?
yeah.
I don't do social media. I never
Okay.
have. I think it was my philosophy on social media. I think it was meant to be a positive thing years ago. And a lot of it now is not so positive. So I say, I don't choose to do it. I don't know who has one, who doesn't. But I can tell you this. If I remember correctly, we disciplined Tim James for this. That would make no matter how many questions we ask, that would be that it's not in line with the policy of the agency if we did discipline him.
Okay. But I believe before we went on a break, you said, did Tim James ever do anything arising to a certain level? And so I just want to see.
No, specific to the beating of the head.
Okay.
You asked me about the Scores parking lot, and I said I do recall the beating of the head, which is outside of policy.
Okay.
And therefore, I know that there was a concerted effort to show the connection between Tim James, because you even said, you asked about him being out at the academy and all that. I said, and you said, do you know why he's going out there? I said, yeah, because he's dating another employee. So there was that connecting. And I said, well, if we're going to do that, in fairness, you got to say, well, that's why I asked,
Yeah.
did he train? I don't know in any of Tim James's, if you're going to go that specific, did Tim James then beat anybody's head on something? I mean, looking for, did Borisade's strikes of her while she's handcuffed, because you went into that whole line of questioning about what is that outside of policy and all that kind of stuff, and trying to attach Tim James to it. Well, that means that Tim would have had to exhibit that too, unless.
Okay, let's get there. And I'm going to start backwards. Is it JSO's policy,
Where you at?
last page, I'm starting backwards. Is it JSO's policy to be polite and be professional?
You mean last page of the post?
Of the
Okay,
last
okay.
page of the,
That's upside down.
oh yeah, there's 2 pages that are upside down before that. But the last picture, what appears to be a Facebook post. Is it JSO's policy to be polite and professional?
I want to make sure we're looking at the same
Yeah.
page, connecting to your, are you looking at the one that's got a rifle
Yes.
on it? And at the bottom it says Tim James at Bailey's Powerhouse Gym?
Yes.
So your question is in relation to that page?
I'm just asking a question. Is it JSO's policy to be polite and be professional?
Well, but
So
you-
you're not
hold on,
referencing this at all?
Objection to form. You had directed him to these pages.
Correct.
Yeah,
And then you
that's-
asked a question.
I'm aware what I did.
Well, I
Say-
object to the form of the question.
Fine, object to form, please. There's a lot of anticipation in my questions, and let's just stick to my questions. If you got an objection, object. Is it JSO's policy to be polite and professional?
Is it JSO's policy to be polite and professional? Yes.
Is it JSO's policy to have a plan to kill everyone you meet?
No.
Is it JSO's policy to enact punishment amongst arrestees?
Objection to form.
I don't understand your question.
Okay. Or is JSO supposed to enact punishment to arrestees?
No.
Okay. If you find out that an officer is telling the public that he's about to go off like a grenade and you better watch what they do or say around me, what should you do with that officer?
Maybe send them for a fit for duty, take their police powers away.
Give them
assign
counseling?
Assign them potentially. I mean, there's a whole gamut of things that you could do.
Should you?
Discipline them,
Okay.
and if you continued behavior or other, move to terminate, and hopefully you either get to terminate them or they resign. If they break the law, arrest them.
Should officers be bragging someone's getting a size 13 boot to the ass tonight?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
How do you apply that to police work?
Okay. What is, and are you familiar with the expression "dirty deeds done dirt cheap"?
It's an old AC/DC song from
Okay.
back in the 80s.
JSO period, dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Do you know what that means?
Other than the song, I have no clue what that means.
Okay. Do you know what dirty deeds are?
Objection to form.
Myself?
Yeah.
Could be anything. Could be smoking dope.
Okay. JSO's officers posting, feeling like ripping someone's head off, and pure fucking Viking right now. What should happen to that officer?
Objection to form.
Is he meaning going to do it at work? I mean, there's a lot of questions. You can't just say that statement. That's why normally, in regards to that, there would be an investigation, administrative. I mean, you gotta attach it to work and verify it's a policy, because we can't say, it'd be like the policeman that says a statement in the privacy of his own home that doesn't hurt anyone. And I'm not thinking of one in particular. And then a friend just happens to be in there and hears him say it and takes it out, and is it related in the context of what it was? I mean, I don't. Some of
Okay.
this stuff. Hey, I already said I don't do social media.
Right.
Some of that stuff sounds bad, but we got to make sure you can apply it to. Again, is there a need for some? You said counseling, not me, but
Right.
potential counseling. Get him off the street. If they can't exercise good judgment, professionalism, then we do what we did with Officer James.
Officer James just appears like in the JSO dirty deeds done dirt cheap seems to be advertising that JSO does dirty deeds done dirt cheap.
Objection to form.
I didn't get that from that.
Okay.
Not a question.
Fair enough. When working road construction, are officers encouraged to, if the public asks, can I go that way, are officers encouraged to drag your ass out of the car window and monkey stomp you?
I got a question. I have a question for counsel on both sides. This is a Borisade deposition, and we're talking entirely about Officer James, which you've got to admit, I've answered every question thus far to my connection here. That's like me when I was the homicide commander showing up for murder A deposition and being questioned about murder B. In fairness to you calling me here, you're asking me questions totally off, and you keep saying you're going to get there. You haven't gotten there in an hour and 20 minutes. We are speaking, you must admit, entirely about not the officer I'm here for.
You're JSO's policy and practices non-retained expert, are you not?
And why you're saying that is to say overarching, but you had a discussion with the counsel over here, and you said you're going, I believe, outside of what your genuineness is. Probably your plan all along, but it was your genuineness at the beginning to say, okay, why is he here? Okay, we'll keep it generalized. And now you're going very specific on Tim James.
And I would let your lawyers handle that with me, or the courts handle that
Well, I
with
will
me.
still, I'm telling you, no, I
Because-
will still voice my opinion.
And
There's-
Sheriff,
that's
just let
fair.
him ask the questions, and
Go ahead.
we'll move
Go ahead.
through.
Are you familiar with our complaint?
What complaint?
Right, exactly. So the question was, if a citizen is near a road construction area and stops and asks direction, is it JSO's policy and procedure to drag their ass out of the car window and monkey stomp them?
You said rephrase that again?
Yeah, sure. If there's a road construction area and somebody asks for directions, should officers be dragging their ass out of the car window and monkey stomping them?
Objection to form.
If somebody stops to ask directions,
Right.
should they be? No.
Okay. referring to this post. It's a bolio. What is bolio?
You said referring, I'm not looking at any posts,
Yeah.
so you're saying what you're doing.
Okay, and you can, I've given them to you, but
Well,
I'm
Mr.
referring-
Phillips, you're whipping through a bunch of documents. You don't have them numbered, and you haven't directed the witness to a document.
Check
So
the
if
form,
you wanna-
sounds like? Is that what you're saying?
It is, John.
Okay. I've gone, Mr. Phillips, please. I've gone backwards through the documents as indicated, but, you know, if you don't want to follow along, that's fine. Are you aware that all these posts were made while Officer Borisade was undergoing training?
Objection to form.
I have no clue.
Are you aware that Officer Borisade testified that he heard other things like this throughout JSO?
Testified when? I have no clue. I haven't heard any of his testimony.
Are officers supposed to let their inner barbarian affect them while on duty?
Objection to form.
What's inner barbarian?
Okay. Those examples we just talked about, are they obvious violations of what an officer should be holding themselves out as?
Objection to form.
Are they obvious? Define the obvious part.
Certainly. Do you know what the word obvious means?
Oh, I know what the word obvious means.
Okay.
Yes.
Is these posts that we've discussed, are they obvious violations of JSO's policies and procedures?
Objection to form. There is a matter called the First Amendment that is implicated in all of this.
I don't understand your question.
Okay. If some of the things we discussed were actually practiced, would that put the public at risk?
Objection to form.
In this entire deposition,
The post that we just discussed.
I've
the
never.
comments that we
I've
discussed.
never. All that talk about Viking and all that stuff. That's the first I've ever even heard of that. I've never seen an officer say, "I'm letting out my innermost Viking," and whatever the stuff you were reading. I'm taking your word for it because I didn't review the post. I told you that before. I just remembered him cooking chicken on a grill with an AR. I would even have to take your word for it that those posts even came from him.
Okay. You provided discipline to Tim James for these posts.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't look at them?
Objection to form.
Do you know what the summation is? I can't just look at, so the investigation still has to, because there's Florida State Statute 112 that there has to be an investigation. They still have their rights. It's investigated. Then I get more in the summation from actually what the violations are. If you've read the summation before, I can't just look at a post and say, hey, person is guilty of A from the post. Nor should I.
Are you aware that 24 days after you disciplined Tim James, he was involved in an incident with a man named John Blessing?
I don't know about the 24 days. I don't recognize the name. So
Are you aware that Tim James was involved in an incident at a Pearl Jam concert?
Objection to form.
from memory right now, I'm not remembering
Okay.
no Elvis. I don't want to say no, but I don't recall because we're talking a couple years ago.
Are you aware that approximately 1 month and 1 week after you strike that? Do you have any opinions as we sit here today about any wrongdoing from the policies and procedures standpoint of Officer Vickery?
Do I have any opinions as I sit here today from the policies and procedures standpoint of Officer Vickery,
Yes.
as I sit here today, in regards to Vickery, watch the video. I probably need to review more before. I don't even recall. I know that I remember little bits and pieces about wrote an RTR, didn't write an RTR, but they were taught one first incident versus second incident in jail, not the other. But as far as every one of his actions sitting here today, I don't recall.
Okay. This is literally the last day of discovery as the parties find them. And so I'm taking a deposition to try to find out what your opinions are going to be for trial. So do you have any opinions on whether Vickery acted appropriately during the entirety of his interactions with Ms. Martinez?
I can't give you my opinion without reviewing
Okay,
more.
fair enough.
I
Do you have any opinions about whether Officer Chastain acted appropriately or inappropriately during his interactions with in the Sallyport?
Chastain, I believe, just like Andres, which I'm sure you're going to get to, plus Cochran, who didn't work for us, somebody else. I remember those names, that they were there. What I do recall is, I believe that during the investigation, if my memory serves me correctly, the line of sight, because if you're familiar with the Sallyport, if you've ever been in there, that they wouldn't have, some of them may not have had direct line of sight, because the only thing that I could think about in regards to them would be whether there should have been potentially an intervention. And I remember Andres walking down and doing some form of intervention.
Okay. Do you have any opinions whether Officer Andres or Officer Chastain violated or didn't violate any policies and procedures of JSO regarding rendering medical care to Mayra Martinez?
The summation, I'll put it this way. Had they would have found to have violated any of that, the summation, which I'm sure is already in the record somewhere, you've already had discovery of that, I'm sure, would have documented such, and through the review process had back then, which memory is better back then, when I reviewed it, had I not concurred, either way, whether they violated or not, it would have been documented.
Okay. Same question as to Borisade. Do you have any opinions whether Borisade acted appropriately under JSO's policies and procedures regarding the rendering or failure to render medical care to Ms. Martinez at the PTDF?
Again, the summation would have documented.
Okay.
that.
What is excited delirium?
Want me to try to give you the best?
Just as you understand it.
It's individuals under the influence of potentially chemical substance, drugs, that causes some physical and potential psychological actions, so to speak, that cause rapid heartbeat, things of that nature.
Okay. What is JSO's policy and procedure regarding what should they do? Strike that. What should a JSO officer do at this time, around this time, if they think they've experienced someone with excited delirium?
If they believe so, I'd have to look at the policy.
Okay.
I'd have to look at the policy. But one of those, I'm sure, is in reference to getting the medical attention.
Okay.
But again, the key part is recognizing.
Okay. But if an officer,
You can't just, officers out on the street encounter many individuals intoxicated, many individuals under the influence of drugs, excited delirium, all three ain't the same.
right,
And some people just maybe with mental issues. So upon recognizing that it's excited delirium, which is a subcategory of all that, I'm sure a rendering of medical attention would be one of them.
Okay. And most, is this a fair statement that most JSO officers are not trained medical doctors?
Yeah.
I would think not.
Yes. Yes. If an officer sees someone, thinks someone has excited delirium, should they then call in medical help? Is that the policy?
Objection form.
I don't know what the exact wording in the policy is, but you got to remember excited delirium may not exhibit a medical distress. It may not be apparent.
Right.
But once you do, if you were to recognize it and any true medical distress, then I would believe one of the things would be make sure they get medical attention.
Okay.
Or at least call for medical attention.
Do you know whether or not a prostrate chair was used in this incident?
I don't recall.
Okay. If a prostrate chair was used, would it be protocol to have some sort of RTR or documentation?
The policy and RTRs have changed somewhat over the years, and now you're asking me layered. To say what the policy said back then, when we may have had anywhere from 2 to 5 revisions, I
Fair
can't
enough.
quote the policy from that time period.
Detective Cayenne talked about myths taught in FTO. Do you know what he meant by that?
Say it again. Sorry.
Detective Cayenne, in one of the interviews, talked about, in his interview with Officer Borisade, former Officer Borisade, he talks about myths taught in FTO. Do you know what that means?
I don't know what he's talking about.
Okay. Do you know if there are myths taught in FTO?
I have no clue what he's talking about. I don't.
Okay. You'd agree with me that a young officer shouldn't be taught myths when in fact there are protocols?
Objection to form.
What's the objection?
I think.
He's already told you he doesn't know
Yeah, I don't have-
about MIS and FTO.
Okay. But assuming Detective Cayenne believes myths are taught in FTO, would you agree that is JSO's non-retained expert on policy and practice that if there are protocols that exist, myths shouldn't be taught?
I would think that the order of the day should be policies and practices.
Have you ever heard the expression, do as I say, not as I do?
Ever in my life?
Yeah.
In my life, yes.
Yeah. Do you know if it affects police officers?
Objection to form.
I have no clue. Individuals would have to tell me that they've been affected. I wouldn't.
Okay.
I mean,
Would you agree with me that abusive conduct on civilians is inappropriate from the policing standpoint?
I'm sorry, did you say inappropriate?
Inappropriate.
would I agree with you that abusing,
Civilians is inappropriate in policing.
meaning your interactions with police? Yes.
Okay. What does JSO do to prevent abusive officer encounters with the public?
Multifaceted. In the very beginning, again, I went through the BLE. Remember your basic law enforcement training. Nowhere in that training have I ever seen, heard, experienced behavior of abuse, condoned, trained, inferenced, whatever. Then when you go back through an orientation class, never have I seen it, heard it. Then you tell them how to do it right, not how to do it wrong. That's in their training. not only through their initial training, but then through their in-service training, their retraining. Then through the supervisory roles, you have overviews of the sergeants and the lieutenants. I think we're talking about physical here, are
Right.
we? That's why they do response to resistance reports, the document incidents. If they're found not to have, then it would be, that runs the whole gamut. I could run down a million rabbit holes with this. You discipline from that. If it's so egregious, such as with Officer James and/or Officer Borisade, they are arrested for violation of the law. Then you do your administrative thing. But also, we have the early warning system in which officers that have meet a threshold of within a certain time period of so many incidents and things of that nature, that keeps their supervisors and their lieutenants in tune with, hey, listen, you were in 2 wrecks in a period, plus you tased somebody, or you tased somebody 3 times in the last so many months, and that sort of stuff. That keeps them hopefully in tune with the officers enough to speak with them. Starts an issue. Sometimes if looks like it's bad, it goes in investigation. If every one of those incidents can be articulated and explained appropriately to be within not a violation of policy, then but it's still documented. So probably from that kind of standpoint, that's how you try to keep them from doing their own thing, as Officer James and Officer Borisade did.
Okay. What is the early warning system? How does that work?
So through our professional standards, professional oversight, then unit, when you use of force, when you're in vehicle wrecks, there's criteria that I'm sure the OGC can get to you. It talks about that you are flagged because of your interactions that you've had in handling calls with the public and things of that nature, and it is an automated reaction thing that the system spits out your name that you've done X, Y, and Z in a time period that we need to, early intervention, early warning of, let's look, might not be anything to this, but it needs to be looked at, and to find out if you are within policy and you're not doing things inappropriately.
Did that exist when Tim James and Borisade were working for JSO?
It's been several years, but I would have to look,
Okay.
the exact date.
Is there a double standard on officer discipline as to when one is in the union and one is not in a union, or one does not have civil service protection and one does?
Objection to form.
So you just has 2 distinct
Okay.
different things. The first one is discipline is done by the administration, the chain of command.
Right.
Investigation administratively is what I'm assuming with you is Internal Affairs does the investigation, so it's separate.
Right.
Those 2 entities are kept separate. I could tell you, but you said the word discipline, so I'm assuming. I have no clue who is an FOP member or a, what's the other one? Very few guys are a member of. There's another one.
Okay.
But we have no clue who's an FOP member
Okay,
or not.
and
Because there's a separation there that even the staff, like when they have their monthly meetings, staff members aren't allowed to attend the meetings. So there's a separation. So no, you wouldn't even know who's a member or not. The only way you potentially could is if they show up for an interview, not me, but again, the separate entity that does the investigation, if they show up with representation.
Okay, and I think that's just my maybe misunderstanding, because I walked in here to some extent thinking civil service protection equals FOP membership, and
Oh, no,
they
no.
do not.
Remember, civil service is through civil service, the city.
Right.
FOP just maybe represents their client going through the steps
Gotcha.
of a process.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I know you and I both are probably, and everybody here are probably tired of me saying his name, but I'm just trying to understand the distinction because, according to our records, August 14, Tim James was in a traffic crash, which was sustained. The next month, he allegedly hit a deer and wrecked his car. The next month, there was an encounter at the PTDF, similar to this one, with a lady named Amanda Jean Gates. The next month, he got a guy named Norman Allen Westbrook he used force on. The next month, he was cited for failure to conform to work standards, which was sustained and received counseling. The next month, he was warned to not go to the academy. The next month, he was seen going to the academy and dealing with Camacho. The next month, he was taken off duty in his marked patrol car. He was off duty in his marked patrol car and was seen at a red light running a red light camera, among other violations, and on and on.
So can I help you?
Bear with me.
Sheriff, let's get a question before you interject.
On and on with failure to obey orders, lying to a superior officer about Camacho and where he was, and all these offensive posts, going up to and through this. There's the Nyman incident at University of Florida. There's hitting and killing a pedestrian Blaine Land, and then it all culminates with punching a handcuffed teenager in the back of a police car. And I'm trying to understand how Officer James got so many chances despite clear action outside the course and scope of his employment, and Officer Borisade didn't.
Objection to form.
Why?
Ask the question.
Why?
Why what? You
Why?
said I'm trying to understand it.
Yeah, and can you help me understand that?
Objection to form.
You don't take this wrong, really
Okay,
don't.
fair.
You don't understand the process. From the perspective of, you said a traffic crash. So let's say the guy is involved in a traffic crash and he causes minor damage because we report every little bit of damage. Do you fire him for that? I'm not trying to ask you a question back, and you go, well, no, everybody, you guys drive. That's your office, moving office. So you say, okay, you don't fire him for that. And I don't know about half of this of what you're telling me. That's going back off of concise history is what you're
Right.
done. Then the very next thing you find out that the guy handled a call and he had a complaint of rudeness, and it says not sustained. And then you go, well, you're going to hold something where after the investigation, it is not sustained, and you go, okay, but it's documented because the retention records say you must keep all that stuff on there for employees. So when you get to start seeing the significant things that were the violation of policies that were sustained against that employee, you find that he was disciplined in line with our discipline policy. We have a discipline policy also, which categorizes the complaints, and they are given a step 1, 2, 3, 4 in reference to how you discipline somebody. So then when you get to something extremely significant, obviously a violation of law, he is dealt with identical to Borisade, and he is arrested. And had he not been off probation, I'd have said the exact. If you go back and watch my other news conferences, you'll hear me actually describe that, where I actually say, and this individual has been boom and fired, arrested and fired. Where when they have the protections, I say they're being placed on administrative leave, or they're being placed. And listen, I didn't create that. You know what that does? You see it as being treated different. I see it as, I would have loved to have fired Tim James immediately thereafter. The process does not allow me to do that.
But you understand that other officers could see that and think they could get away with more.
Oh, no, because no. Hey, you, no disrespect. I've been a policeman a long time. I'm giving you that perspective, not outside you, because you said, how would other officers see it? Oh, no. I look at it and go, Guy did that, was arrested, and had to resign because he knew at the end he was going to be fired. Other guy arrested and immediately fired. Probation, not probation. No way.
Okay. And I'm just drilling down on, an officer in August of 15 who lied directly to the face of his superior officer after doing something he was specifically told not to do, posts a bunch of photos saying he's going to go Viking and beat up people, and then exposes the city to 3 lawsuits for beating up people, and he's still not fired. Why not?
I'd have to go back and recreate that. And again, we already discussed it.
Okay.
We're here for Borisade, and we wanted to dig into every one of Tim James' cases.
Okay. We got to change the video. Let's do one more break and I'll wrap up.
Okay.
Going off the record at 12 o'clock. This is media number 2. We're on the record at 12:10.
Do you have an opinion as to whether, okay, we talked about the Scores parking lot. The pushing down of Mayra's head was across the line, was outside policy and procedure. Fair?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have an opinion as to the other uses of force, as to whether they were inside the line or outside the line?
So in regards to the other uses of force, I know there's some strikes. The video isn't really clear. So I base saying definitively what's outside of policy, what's easy for me to see is the head.
Okay.
The other, you can't tell whether her arm's back or not back and exactly where's he striking her, because if you're striking in the shoulder to get somebody to put their arm back instead of them tucking their arms underneath, that could, in the right circumstances, be appropriate, but that video is not the greatest video.
Okay. Back to PTDF then, are there, I guess the question is this, is there any scenario where a strike is appropriate of a handcuffed arrestee?
I have to sit here and think about that. I believe that there are other techniques that could be, I can't think of any sitting here that you have a justified reason in striking somebody. I mean, there's other techniques you could use
Okay.
to gain, if they're out of control, to gain control.
And I understand is it what you're saying is there are escalation measures, and those escalation measures should be taken in order?
Well, and yes, but also handcuffing is a massive mitigator in there from the officer's perspective, because you're going to have to say, I'm not saying somebody can't attack you. I actually had a handcuffed woman, this is probably in the mid-90s, that she bit me when she was handcuffed. I didn't do anything to her because I knew once I got her mouth away from me, she couldn't bite me again.
Right.
You probably have to describe an exact scenario. That handcuffing takes a lot of their ability to freely move and attack you away.
I mean, is there, obviously, I guess you can lunge and bite, or you can kick. Those would probably be the two more common ways somebody could do something when handcuffed. Is that fair?
There's some, but I'm sure there's others.
Yeah, like charging. I mean, there's other ways.
There's
And
Mr. Phillips, for the record, because you're not off screen, all of your handcuffing demonstrations have been behind the back.
correct.
So can the undersheriff assume that when you're asking about this scenario and the use of force against a handcuffed suspect, that you're talking about a suspect who was handcuffed behind their back?
Yes, that's totally fair, because I am visibly demonstrating.
I was assuming that. the
And
entire
is
time.
it ever appropriate to handcuff in front?
We do not train to handcuff in front.
Why not?
I guess through the years of finding out that individuals can still attack, escape, things of that nature. Those standards that we've talked about several times over the years and years and decades of police work, it came to the conclusion that it is a more secure way to transport, handcuff, restrain individuals. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, you would want them handcuffed behind your back.
Okay. Do officers at JSO have the discretion to refuse medical advice given to an arrestee? Strike that. Do officers at JSO have the right to refuse the advice given by EMTs or medical professionals to an arrestee?
Objection to form.
In other words, let me give you the example. An arrestee is told by a doctor or EMT, an EMT, that she needs to go to the hospital. Are officers at JSO allowed to say no?
Well, it depends. Is it a felony charge? Is it a misdemeanor charge? Is there other, you described part of it. Is there other medical personnel right there at the facility? So I'd need to know probably a little bit more to make sure that we're talking apples and apples.
Okay. Do you have any opinions on whether, and this is one of those questions, do you have any opinions on whether Ms. Martinez was doing yoga at the Sallyport?
Objection to form.
Say that again?
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any opinions as to whether Ms. Martinez was doing yoga while in the Sallyport?
I don't know anything about
Okay.
yoga to Sallyport.
If an officer believes that a fellow JSO officer has used excessive force on an arrestee, does JSO have a policy which requires the witnessing officer to separate the arrestee from the officer who used excessive force?
Does JSO have a policy if he witnessed an officer use excessive force to separate them, but they would have had to known it's excessive force? So I think I don't know what the policy says, you're wording that in a way that it's not, I think I know what you're saying, but you might want to rephrase that.
Yeah, if an officer believes that another officer is using excessive force, what is their obligation?
They should intervene.
Okay.
I would say, call a supervisor, and then that would launch that whole long process as I've told you before. Is it excessive force? Is it a battery? Then after, if it could go criminal, maybe not. It could be administrative, and then you go into
What should the supervisor do?
ensure that the integrity or internal is notified.
Okay. Should the supervisor say, "Don't worry about it, I got that, I know, I understand.
Objection to
We
form.
already know about it."
Objection to form.
Understand, already got that of what to do.
Should a supervisor say, "Don't write an RTR report"
Objection to form.
to an officer who's seen?
Oh, you're in referencing the two, the whole, I mentioned this earlier in the deposition. So you had two uses of forces, two situations where one believed they weren't talking about the same incidents. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm just saying if
Well,
I'm
no,
talking
it-
about.
Okay.
Let me start over.
Yeah.
If that's my problem. If an officer sees another officer use excessive force, you indicated they should. One thing they should do is call their supervisor. Fair?
Yeah.
What should that supervisor do?
You're doing it so you're trying. I've been doing this a long time. You're doing it in a manner where you're wanting to leave out pieces and add other pieces to make it. We know in this scenario that the line that you're getting to is Sergeant Weeks because there were two incidences. You're going to try to get me to give a vanilla policy over here when you're asking me to not know what I know over here.
No, and well, according to, I mean, we're going to get into a debate on what civil rights law says about the officer's perspective at the time. But I'm just asking a question from the policy and procedure standpoint.
I have to read the policy.
Okay, so do you know what the policy and procedures are regarding when, bear with me.
Undersheriff, we need to let him finish the question
Okay.
and answer the question that he's putting to you, irrespective of whether it pertains to this case in specific. I'm sorry.
Fair.
There you go.
Okay. Do you know what JSO's policy and procedure is, or are, when an officer believes a fellow officer has used excessive force on an arrestee?
Objection to form. And may I inquire?
Yes.
Are you asking what the officer should do in the moment?
Yes.
In the moment,
fair. Let me.
proximate to this incident, observing excessive force. Okay.
If one officer observes another officer use excessive force, what he believes is excessive force.
That's going to help me. One word you've been leaving out, believes.
I've read it. Let me start over again. If an officer sees another officer use force that he believes is excess force, what should that officer do at that point, according to JSO's policy and procedure?
As he would any other policy violation potential that he observes, he has the option of notifying his supervisor, or he can make the complaint directly to Internal Affairs or Integrity.
Is there a policy and procedure about whether he should separate the two? The person who's potentially been a victim of excessive force and the officer who who he believed used excessive force.
I don't know if that's in policy.
Why not? Do you know?
Objection to form.
Why? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, strike
Because
that.
I haven't, the policies get revised so many times in a year. Actually, I went on vacation. I just got back last night, and there was a notification of a policy revision, and I don't know if that policy's on there, and that just occurred over the last 5 days.
Okay.
So when I'm trying to be as clear and honest as I can with you to say, I don't know what it says right now.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Based upon your experience as a law enforcement officer, how should that be handled? How would you teach that to be handled, that situation where an officer believes another officer has used excessive force, to the extent of whether they should be separated from the person who was the believed victim of excessive force?
I would say probably separate, but I don't mean you go way over there and you go on, check back in service, maybe stand 5 feet away, maybe.
Should they be allowed to should the potential victim of excessive force be released to the officer so, these long questions. Should the officer who believes the other officer used excessive force release the person who was the victim of the believed excessive force to the officer that used the believed excessive force?
Objection to form.
Yeah, you do.
Should Vickery, if he believed there was excessive force upon Mayra Martinez, have released Martinez to Borisade's custody?
Objection to form.
Now you've gone case specific, not generalized. I don't know what Vickery knew. Sitting here today, I don't recall what Vickery knew at the time of the releasing back to whoever.
Okay. Do you have Vickery's text? Are you aware of a text message that Vickery sent Borisade after this incident?
No.
Okay. Let me have my binders, those folders. Not, I don't need this. Do you know about, are you prepared to speak today about any of the other cases in the last 10 years where JSO has been accused of violation of civil rights from use of excessive force?
No.
Okay. Are you writing something for me? Okay. What's JSO's policies and procedure when an inmate complains of handcuffs, and I am demonstrating, kind of like Mayra Martinez did? Do you recall that part of the video where Mayra Martinez holds up her hands? No?
Right now, sitting here, no.
Okay. Well, what's JSO's policy? I imagine it happens a lot. Does it happen a lot?
Objection to form.
Does complaints about handcuffs being too tight happen a lot in your professional history?
It does.
What's JSO's policy and procedure related to that?
That you have the option of checking them. Sometimes, predominantly, the handcuffs are shaped like an oval, like your wrist is. And what happens is individuals turn their hands. It's usually not the application of the handcuff. It is the individual trying to turn their wrist. And once they turn it in that, like that, that's where they feel the discomfort.
Okay. Are you aware if Mayra Martinez had a purse or a bag strapped with her with her handcuffs behind her back?
I believe there was something.
Is there a policy and procedure regarding whether that should happen, or when that should happen, or when that should not happen?
Specifically spelling out their purses? No.
Whatever item.
I think you got to be more specific.
Okay, fair. Is a purse a potential weapon?
I don't think it's the purse. It would probably be the stuff, maybe something in the purse.
Okay.
Has the purse been searched?
Yeah, I don't know the
know.
answer. Does JSO have a policy or protocol regarding whether a person should be handcuffed with their bag behind their back?
I don't know that if it says that specifically.
Okay. In your practice, is that best practices? Would you do that?
Objection to form.
You're asking my opinion.
Yes.
No, was she? Yeah, I mean, you're describing it. Was she holding it?
It looked like it was handcuffed behind her back.
Looks like, but I mean, we need to know.
Okay.
I mean, because we're being very specific.
Fair.
Was she just holding it? That had he already conducted a search of it and there's no weapon in there? Was she just holding it? I mean, I want to fully understand.
If Vickery believed that Borisade used excessive force, should Vickery have separated Borisade from Mayra Martinez?
Objection to form.
Did he believe? I don't. Did he believe?
If he believed. Well, let's assume he believed. If he indeed believed that Borisade used excessive force on Mayra Martinez in the Scores parking lot, should he have separated Borisade from Martinez?
Objection to form.
Did the excessive force stop? Is it? Oh, it's over. I mean, you're asking it. I'm not trying to be difficult with your question.
Okay.
You get a lot of claims of excessive force, and I don't. Part of that video, something about he was looking up and using his radio when the head strikes were happening, and I can't. The video's not great. I can't even say what Vickery.
But are you aware that Vickery called Weeks to report excessive force at Scores?
I'm not aware of that. I was aware of something about the RTR report.
Okay.
Do one, don't do one. No, we already did it, but they were talking about the two different incidents.
Okay. Speak now, forever hold your peace, Mr. Johnson. Gotta let this officer go. Undersheriff, go.
Okay, we are back on the record.
What affiliation with JSO does Gabriel Rose have?
Gabriel Rose, if we're talking about the one that's assigned to the police academy, is one of our trainers.
Okay. Employed by JSO?
Yes.
Okay. And that's the Northeast Florida Criminal Justice Training and Education Center?
Correct.
What affiliation does that have with JSO?
So the building is owned by FSCJ, and the in-service training, academy classes, the driving training track. He is a JSO employee that works out of that training center.
Okay. Are there any other opinions as we sit here today that you plan to testify at trial in this matter, about what you plan to testify at trial in this matter that you haven't expressed?
That'll all be dictated by what I'm asked at trial.
Okay. Do you have any other, so did you have, and I don't want to know what you talked about, I still don't know if I can find that out, but did you have conversations with General Counsel's office before your testimony today?
That's
Did you meet with General Counsel's office before today?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other areas that you discussed about your trial opinions that we haven't touched on today?
Well, I'm going to object to that because object to form and privilege.
Are you instructing him not to answer?
Well, I'm objecting to the form because it's
What is
too broad and
fair.
you've asked him what his opinions are,
Yeah,
and he's expressed them.
Let me ask this: is it your opinion, and I just don't know, that as a non-retained expert capacity, I can't ask him about conversations with your office? As a normal expert, I could.
No, you can't. You most certainly cannot.
I can ask how an expert was prepared.
It's a fine line, and it's a moot point for this discussion,
Okay.
for this deposition.
Certainly. It's your opinion and contention that I can't ask him about communications with the General Counsel's
You can
office.
ask him what facts or assumptions he was provided by our office in formulating any opinions. You can ask him what materials he was produced and reviewed.
Fair. Are there any other facts and assumptions that you were provided upon which you plan to render opinions on at trial?
I was provided,
Undersheriff, it's a yes or no.
yes,
What?
a lot of which that, well,
Undersheriff, if I think he's misunderstanding you.
I think I am.
Because it's a compound question, provided and linked to opinions that.
oh, no.
Okay.
No.
What were you going to say? Some discovery.
Objection to form.
What were you going to say?
Nothing. I misunderstood the question.
Okay. What did you understand the question to be?
I thought you wanted me to actually list out specific documents and things that I was provided, like a copy of the video, which I've already.
We talked about that. We talked about the stuff you reviewed.
So that stuff. So when he clarified it,
Okay.
it was answered.
Was there anything else that you reviewed upon which you plan to provide opinions at trial?
that we haven't mentioned in this?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Johnson? Thank you for your time. I
Yep.
appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Paul, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Mr. Granite has no questions?
Read or waive.
Oh, we'll read absolutely.
Okay, that concludes this deposition. It is 12:35.